Welcome to Sochi Adler, where you will receive your Su-25T training. While here, you will learn to both fly and fight this aircraft effectively. This aircraft represents a significant upgrade to the original Su-25T, or in NATO's nomenclature, the Frogfoot. Soon after the 25's development, it became apparent that we needed an all-weather ground attack aircraft designed for the anti-tank and CAS roles. The result of that realization is the Su-25T. The 25T boasts a modern HUD, vastly improved avionics suite, greatly expanded attack capabilities, and better survivability. In the course of today's flight, you will become familiar with the 25T's main cockpit instruments, its handling characteristics, and the basics of its Autopilot suite. You will also learn to navigate using the HUD alone. We will be flying a naked bird this evening. While we have a full fuel load, there are no weapons hanging from our hard points. With a full weapons load, the Su-25T is far from agile and can be a true pig to fly, especially at low speed, so be very careful. Those weapon system upgrades to the baseline 25 came at a price, and that price is increased weight, leading to a decrease in performance and handling characteristics. This aircraft is not a sleek stiletto. Rather, think of it as a Roman broadsword, heavy and devastating, but requiring muscle and room to maneuver. So, we will begin slowly. For this evening's flight, we will not have the added weight of weapons, but once you have become familiar with the aircraft's handling characteristics, weapons will play a very prominent role in your training. Okay, we have a lot to accomplish this evening, so let's get started. First, let's turn on the avionics systems with the Shift and L key. As you can see, the main panel remains very similar to that of the basic Grach. Although a few instruments have changed their location slightly, most are recognizable and in their proper place. The exception, of course, is the Autopilot panel to the lower left. This one is new. We'll come back to it once we're in the air. Here are the angle of attack indicator, or AOA, and accelerometer. When the angle of attack reaches the critical limit, this lamp lights. You do not want to fly with it lit. Keep it lit for too long and you'll enter a deep stall and have all the flight dynamics of a rock. Continuing, here is the airspeed indicator. Indicated airspeed, or IAS, is located on the outer dial and repeated from the HUD. True airspeed, or TAS, is indicated on this inner dial, which is covered at the moment. It uncovers when your IAS reaches 400 kilometers per hour. The inner dial rotates so that your TAS always lies directly under the speed indicator needle. The radar altimeter. Notice the red flag? That flag means this reading is not to be trusted. It'll always be red flagged while either on the ground or flying below 40 meters of altitude. It is also flagged when your altitude exceeds 1,400 meters above ground level, or AGL. If it's red flagged at any other time, you have a problem. The barometric pressure altimeter. Before takeoff, always check to make sure the correct pressure is set. You can tell whether it is correct or not by the altimeter reading. A map with air-based runway altitudes is included in your training package. Study it and check the reading against the figures on the map. You can increase or decrease the pressure reading using the Shift plus and Shift minus key combinations respectively. When you enter the cockpit on the ramp, this reading is usually correct, but when you enter on the runway, the barometer is set to sea level. At some air bases, this is not too critical, but flying out of Makeup, for example, you'll be flying 180 meters lower than you think you are if relying on the barometric altimeter, so always check it against your chart. Here are the Attitude Director Indicator, or ADI, and Horizontal Situation Indicator, or HSI. Although we'll mostly ignore them today, these are your two primary steam gauge navigation instruments. But for this evening, we will rely on the HUD to get us where we want to go. The ADI and HSI will be covered in more depth in your next training flight. Here's the Vertical Velocity Indicator, or VVI. The vertical velocity, or how quickly you are climbing or falling through the air, is indicated on this gauge and repeated on the HUD right here. These last three instruments deal with the power plant and fuel. Tachometer, left and right engine temperature, and fuel gauge. The Su-25T accelerates slowly, so learn to anticipate your power needs or you'll quickly find yourself on the wrong side of the power curve. Okay, let's get this bird ready to fly, starting the left engine with the Alt-Home keys. That'll give us hydraulic pressure so we can set our flaps. Collision lights on with the Control L and Control L keys again. Flaps to takeoff position with the Shift F. Canopy coming down and locked with Control C. Right engine start with the Shift Home keys. And now we just have to wait for all of our systems to stabilize. Okay, everything looks good. Let's get this show on the road.
Первый, запрос на руление. Первый, 1-1. Разрешаю руление на полосу. 24.
Advance the throttles to start rolling, then pull back to the Malay gauze setting to taxi. Malay gas, I like that, small gas. When you stop to think about it, those two words, small gas, highlight our cockpit design philosophy. We standardize our cockpits. Climb into any of our aircraft and the basic instrument panel with the odd gauge or display here or there will be instantly familiar. It makes transitioning from one aircraft to another that much easier. I bet we stenciled that phrase in our very first biplane, and we've been standardizing our cockpits ever since. While we're taxiing, let's take a look at the HUD. For the moment, it is set to pilot mode. This is the most basic of HUD modes and is used for flying by visual flight rules, navigating by landmarks. There are no navigational data displayed. Look down at the ADI. Notice those two red flags? The left one means that pitch steering is unreliable. The right, that bank steering is unreliable. So the ADI will not be able to direct your flight when you are in this mode. In the center of the HUD is the aircraft datum with a horizon reference line. Imagine you are viewing our aircraft from directly behind. This is what you'd see: aircraft body, left wing, right wing, and tail. This datum remains stationary, and the horizon line will rise above or below it as the aircraft's nose rises above or below the true horizon. As the aircraft banks and rolls, the datum banks and rolls too, so you can always tell your orientation to the horizon. The angled reference lines below the horizon line indicate various degrees of bank. Starting at wings level or 0 bank, the additional tick marks indicate 5, 10, 15, 30, and 60 degrees of bank. There is also a numerical pitch tape to the right side of the horizon line that will show how many degrees of pitch the nose is above or below the horizon. Positive pitch or a nose-up attitude is indicated by a solid line in front of the number. In the case of a negative or nose-down attitude, those lines are dashed. Once again, here's the vertical velocity reading from the VVI repeated on the HUD. It describes climb or descent in meters per second, and it's very important to pay attention to it. In most flight regimes, this aircraft's attitude, as indicated by these HUD indicators here, will make you think that you are in level flight or climbing, when in fact you are losing altitude. So trust this reading and fly accordingly. Across the top of the HUD are the heading tape with the indicated airspeed, or IAS, to the left and current altitude to the right. Our current heading is 332 degrees. 330 plus 2 degrees. Let me pay attention here for a minute. Okay, we're taxiing, and right now our indicated airspeed is less than 10 kilometers per hour, and therefore is indicated as 0. Airspeed on the HUD is measured in units of 10. Our current altitude is 0. Whenever you fly below 1400 meters AGL, the reading for the current altitude is taken from the radar altimeter. It switches to the barometric altimeter only after you exceed 1400 meters AGL. This letter indicates that the reading is radar or barometric, and at the present it is being taken from the radar altimeter. Okay, now let's add navigational data to the HUD by pressing the 1 key. The first navigation mode is the en route mode, indicated by this abbreviation in the lower left-hand corner. Look at the additional data superimposed on the basic HUD in this mode: current selected waypoint, distance to the waypoint, assigned airspeed, and assigned altitude. You cycle through waypoints with the tilde key. There are two navigation submodes, return and landing. These are entered automatically when the appropriate waypoints are reached, or they can be switched manually. Each press of the 1 key cycles to the next navigation mode in sequence. We are currently in the en route mode. Let's hold here and check for traffic before we cross this runway. Yeah, looking clear. Press the 1 key and you enter the return mode. In return mode, the waypoint number changes to the code number for the airbase you are returning to. Here at Sochi Adler, we are number 18. There's a complete list in your training packet. The other readings, distance, required airspeed, and altitude, now refer to that airbase's initial approach fix, or IAF. This is the point at which our navigation system will automatically switch itself to the landing sub-mode. But let's enter the landing mode manually by pressing the 1 key again. You will see this mode in action at the end of our flight. For now, just remember that this number continues to report the airbase number code. Just as you can cycle through waypoints in the en route sub-mode, using the tilde key, you can cycle through airbases in the return and landing sub-modes should you need to land on an alternate base. Finally, the landing sub-mode automatically switches to the ILS sub-mode once the glide slope and localizer beams are intercepted. Common to all navigation modes is this navigation mark or steering circle. It indicates where to fly in order to find and follow the assigned altitude and course. Simply keep it centered in the aircraft datum's body, and you'll never need to look anywhere else to tell you where to fly. Unless, of course, the HUD fails. Okay, let's cycle back into the en route mode. Check for traffic. Looking good. Let's take the runway. Get yourself lined up on the center line of the runway. As you're taking off, if you need to adjust, just use slight inputs on the rudder pedals. Okay, everything looking good.
Первый, разрешите взлет. Первый, 1-1, взлет по готовности.
Here we go. Brakes on, smoothly advance the throttles. Hesitator around 70% thrust, check your gauges, and smoothly advance to full throttle. Here we go. Small inputs on the rudder pedals if you need to adjust to keep on center line. Rotate at 200 kilometers per hour. Hold it. And we're airborne. Gear coming up. Forward pressure against the stick to keep the climb from steepening too rapidly. Flaps in to the maneuvering flap setting. And now that we have altitude and airspeed, flaps in completely. As you fly, always keep one eye on the AOA indicator. Now we fly where the steering circle points. Right now it's above and to the right of the aircraft datum, so we climb to the right and pull it down into the aircraft datum's body. We are navigating using the HUD. We are in the en route mode, heading for waypoint 2, which is 22.4 kilometers away. The steering circle is directing our flight so that we will intercept our course line and head for waypoint 2 on the prescribed course. As I said, just fly the steering circle. Keep it centered. If it shifts to the right or left, you move to the right or left. If it goes up, you go up. If it goes down, you go down. Just go where the steering circle points. With the HUD, navigation is fairly easy. Right now, the navigation system is directing us back toward our required course line. When we intercept it, the steering circle will swing toward the waypoint. We just follow where it tells us to go. It's swung to the left. I'll start banking to the left. The required altitude for waypoint 2 is 500 meters. Required speed is 530, though I'm not worrying about hitting the precise speeds this evening. Just follow the steering circle. As I swing back, let's take a closer look at the Autopilot or Automatic Control System ACS panel. There are 6 buttons. We will consider 4 of them today. We will start with barometric altitude hold. You engage it by pressing the Alt-4 key combination to stabilize your current altitude as measured above sea level, or ASL. Engaging it now. Notice the buttons which are lit on the ACS panel. This is the pattern for barometric altitude hold. In this mode, your altitude as measured ASL is held constant, but you are free to turn and bank. And because it uses pitch trim to level the aircraft, this mode is especially useful in trimming the aircraft for your current airspeed. Notice that we are in level flight as the ground rises and falls below us. Okay, I've disengaged the ACS with the Alt-9 keys. The navigation system has switched to waypoint 3, and we follow the steering circle to the new course and altitude. We're on the new course line, but a little high. The steering circle is directing us to fly lower. Oh, a little too low. 3.7 kilometers to waypoint 3. Keeping the circle centered. And here's waypoint 4. The new required altitude is 700 meters. Have you noticed that waypoint altitudes are given in meters above sea level, ASL? That's why it's so important to have the correct pressure setting dialed in on the barometric altimeter. Still following the steering circle. In addition to the barometric altitude hold mode, there is also a radar altitude hold. You engage it with the Alt-5 key combinations. I will just demonstrate it later in the flight. Radar altitude hold maintains the same radar altitude above ground level. In essence, this is a terrain following mode. As the ground rises and falls, you will rise too and fall. But be wary of engaging it at low altitude over rough terrain. It only looks down, not ahead. At some point, you will almost invariably end up pitched down as the terrain is rising rapidly in front of you, and I'll have the unpleasant task of sending what's left of you home to your mother in a small cardboard box. Okay, I've re-engaged the barometric altitude hold. Notice which buttons are lit to stabilize us at 700 meters ASL. 3.6 kilometers to waypoint 4 and counting down. Barometric autopilot disengaged. With the ground rising ahead of us, each waypoint is set to require a higher altitude. Here we go. Follow the steering circle, banking right and climbing. By the way, the farther the steering circle is offset from the aircraft datum, the more severe the climb or turn must be. Slowly pulling it into the center. Let's make sure we cross this ridgeline first. It sure is beautiful around here. Sochi Adler is a great place to be assigned. Great scenery both up here and down at the beach resorts. Okay, waypoint 6 coming up. Follow the steering circle. Alright, up and to the right. Let's be sure to clear this hill, adding throttle. Always keep an eye on your airspeed and, especially if you are turning, the AOA indicator. New required altitude, 1200 meters ACL. Bring the nose down. Steering circle into the datum body. Waypoint 7 is up and to the left. Advance the throttles. New required altitude, 1450 meters ASL. The steering circle is directing us down, but I think I'll ignore it for the moment. Let's make sure we clear these trees. Keep an eye on your airspeed. Throttling back. Next waypoint is up and to the right. New required altitude, 1840 meters. We are climbing up into the mountains. Advancing the throttles in anticipation of a climb that's coming up. Following the steering circle back to the left. And climbing. After waypoint 9, I'm going to ignore the director's circle and make our own way to waypoint 10. I'm going to slip down a side valley and slow down in the descent. It's a great approach to Lake Horitsa and will allow you to see how small a margin of error exists at slower speeds in this aircraft. Waypoint 9, just ahead. Waypoint 10 is below us and to our right, but we'll clear this ridge to our left instead. Throttling back. Air brakes extended. The 25T does not decelerate quickly. It's slow to accelerate and slow to decelerate. Okay, slipping into this valley. Still slowing. In a moment we will turn right into a new valley. Notice the limited forward visibility due to the cockpit frame. In constricted spaces, it can be really hard to see where to fly. Keep an eye on the AOA indicator and warning light. With the slower airspeeds, it's easy to be in the doorstep of a stall. Did you feel that? Dropping down into the new valley. At slow speeds, be very gentle on the stick. Be patient. That's the A309 auto rope below us. It starts down on the coast and climbs steeply into the mountains past the resorts on Lake Ritsa. The valley turns sharply left up ahead and drops steeply, so we'll have to be gentle on the stick. Easy does it. Keep an eye on the AOA indicator. There's the east end of the lake directly ahead. Welcome to Lake Ritsa. There are two resorts here. One is coming up just on our right. Beautiful. We are going to climb up this rising valley. Without much weight, the Su-25T can climb fairly well with a running start. With a full weapons load, however, it's a different story. You'll need to give yourself a lot of room to climb away and turn before re-attacking a target. Keep an eye on the AOA indicator as we come over the top here. With a full weapons load, clearing this ridgeline would be a bit problematic. Okay, brakes out. Throttling back so that we don't overspeed in the descent back down to the lake. Keep an eye on your airspeed. Speed brakes in. The valley and the A309 continues down to the coastal plain through that gap. Some of our advanced pilots have been known to shoot that valley during their time here. Don't let me catch you down there. Okay, we're going to follow the steering circle to waypoint 11. Advancing the throttles and simply following the steering circle. Hold this bank and continue to climb. There's the A309 down in the valley. The valley walls are very steep at this point. The steering circle is directing us lower, but I think we'll ignore it just now. We're at 1700 meters ASL and it wants us at 1600. That's down in those trees. We're heading towards waypoint 12 and there's the valley below us again. Following the steering circle to the left and down. We'll engage the route following ACS mode next with the Alt-6 keys to take us the rest of the way to waypoint 12. Unlike the barometric and radar altitude holds, this mode controls both pitch and steering or bank. You only control airspeed once it's engaged. Engaging it now. Notice the two buttons which are lit. Autopilot and route following. Route following is now maneuvering the aircraft using pitch and bank trim controls. If you canceled this mode right now, you would have to retrim the aircraft yourself for straight and level flight. so it's best never to cancel the mode prematurely. Now suppose you want the ACS to follow the route, but at an altitude different from the one you were assigned. In that case, while in the route following mode, also press the barometric altitude hold button or Alt-4. Press and hold the override button, Alt-tilde, to temporarily override the system. Climb or descend to the altitude you want. I'll climb a few hundred meters. Release the override button, and the ACS will now follow the assigned route, but maintain the new altitude. You can do this with the radar altitude hold mode as well, but your altitude would have to be less than 1,400 meters AGL. Okay, there's Gudauta Air Base off in the distance to our left, and Gagra, a beautiful resort town to the right. Great beaches, great scenery, and the mountains come right down to the sea. We'll fly the ACS in route following mode to waypoint 12, our last waypoint before landing. When we reach it, you will see the navigation system switch to the return submode with its number 18 Sochi Adler designation. Because we have modified the ACS in route mode with the barometric altitude hold, we will turn to our base but remain at this altitude. There's the switch. Number 18, the designation for Sochi Adler's IAF or Initial Approach Fix. Notice that the assigned altitude is now 4,530 meters, but we are holding the altitude more or less we desire through the turn, and will remain at this altitude unless we turn off the barometric altitude hold. If you wanted, you could turn off the barometric altitude hold alone by simply pressing the Alt-4 key combination again. This is going to be a brutal leg with the sun directly in our eyes like this. Let's break off this heading and I'll show you a third ACS mode. Let's just cancel ACS completely with the Alt-9 keys. I want more altitude under us for what I'm going to show you. Think of this mode I'm about to show you as the panic mode. Engaging it will return the aircraft to level flight from any attitude. It is called, naturally enough, the emergency leveling mode. Just want a bit more altitude here. Let's invert and dive. Engage the emergency leveling mode with the Alt-3 key combination. First it will roll you upright, and then it will put you back into level flight. There we go, almost there. Notice the buttons which are lit, Autopilot and Emergency. And that's emergency leveling. We have one last ACS mode to cover today, radar altitude hold. It will not engage above 1,400 meters altitude. Engage it above that altitude and the aircraft will first drop to 1,400 meters before the aircraft will fly level. Also, the radar only looks where the aircraft's underside is pointing. When you bank in a turn, you will find that the altimeter's radar is looking off to the side. The system will see your altitude is increasing. If the reading exceeds 1,500 meters, you can suddenly find yourself switched to the barometric altimeter. Okay, I've engaged radar altitude hold. Those switch buttons are lit. It's been holding us level. Now I'm banking into a turn. Watch the altitude readout increase even though we aren't climbing. There, it suddenly switched to the barometric altimeter. Now it's trying to drop us down again. Okay, I'm going to switch on both route following and altitude hold. Overriding with Alt Tilde to lower our altitude. Released, re-engaged. With the radar altitude button also engaged, it's trying to drop us to 1400 meters. Now it's starting to compensate, pulling our nose up. And now we're dropping again. I'm overriding the ACS again to force us down below 1400 meters. Re-engaging. And now that I've waited to re-engage the radar altitude hold below 1400 meters, we'll have a smooth flight. Okay, now we're flying level at roughly 1300 meters AGL, although it's actually over water. And the route following mode is following the required course. We are still in the return navigation sub mode with 45.8 kilometers remaining to the IAF. Since we have some time, let's take a further look at the cockpit instrumentation. These are the trim lights. They are lit when the indicated trim is neutral and dark when the trim has been set. They do not, however, indicate the direction of the trim. The top light indicates pitch trim. It is dark at present because the ACS has input some pitch trim. The middle light indicates bank or aileron trim. As you can see, right now, no trim is needed to keep us wings level. And the bottom light indicates rudder trim. Presently, the rudder is trimmed to center, and so its indicator light is lit. And let's look again at the airspeed indicator. Because our IAS is in excess of 400 kilometers per hour, the TAS dial is now visible. You use IAS to fly. It determines how the aircraft behaves in the air. Use TAS to navigate. It tells you how fast you are actually traveling from point A to point B. The briefing map uses TAS, but the navigation system translates that into IAS for display on the HUD. Look at the markings around the circumference of the dial. At speeds below this white tick mark here, you are either taking off or landing. The lower end of the arc between the blue and the white tick marks is the power off stall speed with both gear and flaps retracted if the aircraft is heavy. The upper end is the maximum landing flaps extension speed. The arc between the yellow and blue tick marks is this aircraft's normal operating speed range. Above the yellow tick mark is the caution range. Avoid this area unless it's absolutely necessary to fly there. And the red area is the never exceed speed. By this point, parts of your aircraft have begun to fall off. Let's get our heads out of the cockpit for a minute and look around. That's Sochi Adler out there in the distance. The airspace certainly looks clear enough. Let's take a quick look at the fuel gauge. 5630 kilograms of fuel remaining. The inner and outer external fuel tanks are registering as empty. That's no surprise since we aren't carrying them this evening. Our wing tanks, indicated by the Kura, are now empty. That light was dark when we took off. The lights below those three, which are presently dark, indicating that they have fuel remaining, are 3-4 for the third and fourth fuel tanks, Jet, representing the central fuselage tank, and finally 0.6, emergency fuel quantity. When that last light is lit, your wheels had better be inches away from the runway. And reviewing briefly, we've seen 4 of the 6 ACS modes in operation: route following, barometric altimeter hold, radar altimeter hold, and emergency leveling. 2 of those, barometric and radar, allow you to control your direction while the ACS controls your altitude. Route following and emergency leveling, however, take control of both. Well, at least on this heading, the sun isn't as blatantly in our eyes. Pretty evening out here. Okay, I've gradually been slowing down as we've been closing in on the IAF. There's Sochi Adler just clearing the canopy frame. 14.4 kilometers until the IAF, at which point the navigation system will automatically switch to the landing sub-mode. And continuing to slow. The required altitude for the IAS is dropped to 1,030 meters ASL. I'm going to disengage the radar altitude hold by pressing the Alt-5 key and allow the return following mode to regain control. Here we go. Speed brake extended, throttle back. Keep your airspeed under control. We want to hit the IAF with an IAS of roughly 330 kilometers per hour. Still slowing gradually. Maneuvering flaps extended. I'm going to turn the panel lights on to make the instruments easier to see, I think. Okay, maintain your airspeed. I've throttled up a bit. Now we just wait for the switch to landing mode from return mode. Okay, there's the shift to the landing sub-mode. The navigation system is turning to intercept the runway glide slope and localizer beams that will guide us down. Keep control of your airspeed. Slow gradually. 320 right now. We've intercepted the glide slope, I, and localizer K beams. There are now two circles on the HUD. The larger director circle still tells you where to fly just as it did before. When landing, you still follow it. The smaller circle represents the glide slope. The steering circle tells you where to fly to pull it into the aircraft datum. But this evening we're letting the ACS handle all that. We'll concentrate on flaps, landing gear, and airspeed. The ACS is maneuvering to pull both circles into the aircraft datum. Start in on the glide slope at approximately 330 kilometers per hour. At around 9 kilometers from the runway, we'll extend our landing gear. Gear down. Three green. Bleed off your airspeed gradually. We want to be flying at between 260 and 280 kilometers per hour at the inner beacon marker, a bit faster if we're heavy. Let me mention now that you must disengage the ACS at an altitude of 100 meters and take manual control of the landing. Otherwise, with the ACS engaged, the emergency leveling function will take over at roughly 50 meters altitude. Landing flaps extended. Advance the throttles to compensate for the increased drag. Make small throttle adjustments. Be patient. Everything takes more time at slower speeds. Keep your airspeed between 260 and 280 kilometers per hour. Inner marker tone and 280 IAS, disengaging the ACS with Alt-9. I'm now flying the aircraft. Pull the stick back gently to begin the flare, airspeed 260. Throttles to idle, settle to the runway. Stick slightly forward to bring the nose down, deploying the braking chute with the P key. Wheel brakes engaged to slow us further. Small steering adjustments with the rudder pedals. Don't over control. And we're down. Okay, 2 notes concerning the chute. First, the braking chute helps to steady you on the runway in addition to rapidly slowing your speed, so be sure to deploy it. But most importantly, deploy it only when your speed is less than 300 kilometers per hour. Otherwise, you risk tearing it to shreds and stopping will suddenly be far more difficult. And finally, I want to re-emphasize one aspect of the ACS. It uses trim to control the aircraft. When you cancel an ACS mode, you inherit the trim set at the moment of cancellation. If, for example, you cancel the ACS while the route following mode has you in a steep climbing turn to the right, you'll be fighting an aircraft that wants to continue climbing to the right, so use care when you disengage the ACS. And that concludes this training flight. Thank you. You have control.